الدنيا زي السكر.
Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Silent Majority. Today's episode is about the Matrix and how the Matrix has corrupted the society. But this is a bit different from an Andrew Tate show or anyone else that likes to speak on the matter. This is from a Muslim lens and how it's affected our Muslim societies in the West. Now, I have a very esteemed guest of mine here today. He's actually, thank you very much. My brother's name is Khaled Shaheen, and he's a businessman and an academic, and he has a lot to say about the Matrix itself. But I do want to thank you on camera. You've actually gone out of your way. I know you're a very, very busy man, and you've cleared your schedule to be here today, so I appreciate you.
No,
thank you very much.
Thank you for the time.
No, the pleasure's ours. Thank you. So just before we start about the Matrix, I'd like to thank my first sponsor, Ahyan Estate. If you're a landlord or you're looking for a property, reach out to them. You're in capable hands. They'll provide you with the best properties in town. Simplex Coaching, if you have any family matters or if you need anything dealt with, reach out to Simplex Coaching. Thank you very much. Now, without further ado, Brother Khaled, you speak extensively on various other social media platforms, and I think you're quite big on TikTok and Instagram, and you talk on this matter extensively, but I want to discuss maybe 2 or 3 pertinent topics regarding society and how it affects Muslims and the Muslim household from a Muslim perspective. So I want to start you off and ask you, firstly, just tell us a little bit about yourself so the audience can understand. Obviously, I've said a businessman, you're a very private man, and you're an academic. So just a quick introduction.
Alhamdulillah, salatu salam. Allahumma yassir li amri wa shrah li sadri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate the intro. In terms of my background, I used to live in the States. I currently live in the UK. I'm a family man, alhamdulillah. I'm blessed with 3 beautiful boys.
MashaAllah.
I tend to find myself trying to understand society and the world that we live in today from an Islamic lens, which requires me to kind of understand what the Quran is, if that's the instruction manual and the guide for us as Muslims to use to help us understand our life in a better way, then it becomes incumbent upon us to understand that book, to go through the different books of tafsir, to understand the ahadith, because this is what's going to give you a clear view of the world you see today, because we find ourselves living in a time that is so enveloped in darkness. It is confusing. People don't know where to go. People don't understand what they're supposed to make out of this life. They don't understand their purpose. And you see this echoing in all the different realms that you can measure within society, right? Through the younger age, through children, through teenagers, through adults. I mean, even in marital relationships and so forth, you find that everybody's kind of going in their own direction and they're not unified under what they are meant to be doing to fulfill their ultimate purpose, because that purpose is lacking. People do not understand what that purpose is. And so if we have a book that has come to us, and in that book, out of the many chapters that are in it, there is a specific chapter that we are meant to read every Friday as a protection. The first 10 verses of it as a protection against the Dajaal, the greatest fitna to ever befall the Muslim Ummah, a time of ultimate confusion. And so then it becomes, necessary for us to try to understand what that chapter is about. And in the first verse of that chapter, and I won't go too much into it, there are people who are far more knowledgeable in this topic than I am, but I will touch on the first verse where it says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي أنزل على عبده الكتاب ولم يجعل له عوجا. All praise and gratitude be to Allah, who has revealed down to his slave Muhammad the book and has made within it 0 deviation. And the reason that's important is because this book stands a test of time, whereby you see societal norms changing every era, depending on what the whim or desire, the political agenda, whatever the movement is in society, they will adjust the general notion and people's perception of reality to meet that agenda. But as things change, we find that there is a constant that does not deviate, does not adjust, cannot be messed around with, cannot be, modified in any way, shape, or form, and that is the book. And so when you try to hold on to that book, you will find today that if you try to hold on to that book and actually listen to its teachings and adhere to them and implement them in your life, that you stick out like a weird person. You look like a stranger. And you know what's also interesting about strangers is that there's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad that said, Islam came as a stranger and it will come back once again as a stranger. And so glad tidings to the strangers. Now, to try to understand this verse, this hadith, my apologies, why would you be a stranger? That means you don't fit in. What don't you fit into exactly? So if society is not matching what the Quran is teaching, then why do you want to be part of society if you call yourself a Muslim? you would want to hold on to the teachings of the book instead of putting it behind and saying, you know what, that's outdated. And if you really must hold on to the teachings of the book, then try to do that in your house, in seclusion and privacy, because if you come out and try to bring that to the world, they will think that you're backwards. They will think that that doesn't work here. You know, we need to take interest-based loans. We need to, you know, have free mixing relationships. We need to go to certain places to conduct our business. This is incorrect. Understand your purpose from the book, from the master, from the creator. The one who created you and knows you better than you know yourself has told you what your purpose is, and you are choosing otherwise. You know, where are you coming from? You know, subhanAllah. But yeah.
Wow. Asked for introduction.
I know, my apologies. I went...
Riveting. I was engrossed.
Alhamdulillah.
There's a few things I'm going to pick out from there. So
Sure.
the Quran does stand the test of time, and it is a mercy to us. You said 2 or 3 things. So I want to touch on Western decadence.
Sure.
I want to touch on, so prior to Dajjal coming, and everything is heralding to Dajjal coming.
Right.
So the state of confusion.
Right.
So we've got Western decadence, the state of confusion, and you mentioned stranger, the ghuraba. So these 3 concepts are profound.
Right.
If we adopt that into our Muslim Western societies, so Western Muslim societies rather, I want to start rather on family structures.
Sure.
How that has changed over time, and what do you think the Matrix, let's call it the Matrix, that's what it's called, right? That's what
It's the Dajaalic system, the matrix, the agenda, the system, whatever
yeah,
it is.
so the agenda of the system, the Matrix system, how has that affected the Muslim Western family structure?
Right. Well, I mean, you can look at this across any society across the world. The essence of a society is a family, and a family consists of a husband, a wife, and children. And that familial structure is there to create a certain level of protection against the outside world, especially in times of corruption and evil, right? And so if you have a family structure where the husband is the leader, the father, right? He's the head of the household. You have the wife who's there to nurture, to take care, to provide love and warmth and comfort in the house. You have children who are growing up in that kind of environment, subjected to the deen and its teachings. Then you can create a future generation that is filled with real men and real women who understand their roles in society, adhering to the teachings of the religion. But if that were absent through infiltrations from the outside, where you can separate man from wife to bring them out into the world, because a woman has a position in society, especially in an Islamic environment, right? This is a very high and esteemed, honorable, dignified position. This is not what's taught out there, right? You will find people calling for certain movements out there to try to liberate women from these shackles of ancient religion. And this is all false. This is all a scam and it's a lie. Because people, you even find Muslim women out there who say, for example, that I'm a feminist. Are you really a feminist, or do you support a certain element of feminism that you think is actually there to help you, but not the entirety of feminism? Because you can be, for example, one for elections, but you're not necessarily a Democrat, or you don't support democracy, let's say, but you support elections. Let's take that for an example, you know. And so you have people who have a misunderstanding of what feminism is, what it really actually is trying to push out. Who came up with this, and why is there suddenly a movement, and why are we accepting it? What is it we're talking about here? Now, does feminism coincide with the Islamic teachings? Yes or no? That's a very simple question. And if it doesn't, then what are you doing with it? And if it does, then okay, you're more than welcome to join. But it doesn't really. If you start looking and start to divide and understand what the actual teachings of feminism are, the way it's promoted in the Western societies today, to liberate women by making them commodities in the market that are subservient to man, to sell, to promote, to market, and do all kinds of filthy immoral behaviors. That's one of the main ideas. I mean, there's a lot to touch on.
I want to interject there. Empirically, I'm going to paint out a nuclear family.
Sure.
So a man and wife,
Yep.
and I think it doesn't just apply to Muslims in the East or the West. I think all people, a nuclear family, man and wife with children, right? Now, from a pragmatic perspective, in the 21st century, a man and woman work.
Right.
And because the woman works, and I speak about this extensively on all my episodes, that unfortunately because of, and you've got a grin on your face, because of the economical climate that we live in,
Sure.
both man and wife need to work.
Right.
But that comes with consequences.
Right.
Because if a woman, starts paying the bills and starts providing for herself, when ultimately it was a man's role, and it has been a man's role up until the 20th century, how does that affect the dynamics of gender roles? And also,
Sure.
feminism does come into this, and how does the matrix, so the system, how does it employ this tactic of women working to further exacerbate its agenda?
Fair enough. But first of all, look back into when women started joining the workforce in the Western world, right? You know, you're looking at around the 20s in the States, for example, when they started promoting that women should go out and work to have, you know, equality with men. Equality with men is something very different. Islam doesn't teach equality, it teaches justice. There's a difference between equality and justice. رِجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. And if you come with a feminism, an idea from feminism that says, men and women are equal, then this contradicts the ayah from Allah, the Creator, who says, الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. Among many other verses, it put a woman in her position and a man in his position. And mainly this one is responsibilities and duties. But anyways, coming back to your point, when you look at the women who started to join the workforce in the Western societies, why was this out there? I mean, you have to look at it from the mindset that the Western forces were using at the time. And this isn't one that's from religion. This is one purely from capitalism and trying to dominate and take advantage of the human capital, the workforce. So we can say, all right, the men are working, sure, but if we can also bring in women who at that time are seen as somewhat lesser, as somewhat who we can pay less, for example, because they're not as qualified or not as capable as a man. This is the idea that's kind of being pushed out there in the past. And so let's bring them on board for a cheaper wage. So now we have double the workforce. Now there's more things that come out of this. So you have two people from the household both working. Aside from the social, the emotional effects that this has on each one of them and towards a relationship by mixing with other people of the opposite gender, by constantly being exposed to the workforce and being exhausted, that when you come home, neither one of you has the energy to even entertain each other or take care of each other. If you had children, who's meant to take care of them? So you have to send them out to an institution out there that's given to you by the same hand that took your woman out of the house and put her in the market in front of all these women, in front of all these men.
Well said.
So now you bring the children and you say, well, I got to do something with them. Someone's got to take care of them, feed them, and educate them and do all these kinds of things. So then the system comes and says, hang on, I got a solution for you. Don't worry about it. If you must have children, and they're kind of a hindrance, right? Because children, they cost a lot of money. You got to save for university bills. You got to take care of them, feed them, clothe them. Better if you just try to limit how many children you have, when Islam contradicts that completely. Rasulullah said, have as many children as you can, for I take pride in the size of my ummah on the day of judgment, right? And even in the Quran it says, لا تقتلوا أولادكم خشية إملاق نحن نرزقهم وإياكم نحن نرزقكم وإياهم. There's two different verses. Do not kill your children out of fear of poverty. And this is a rough translation. We will provide for you and for them. And another verse, for them and for you. He puts one in front of the other. Different meanings, but nevertheless the idea stands the same. And so they say, we'll take your children, give them to us. Now what happens when you give your children to a society that is not guided by an Islamic teaching? You have a society that's basically falling back on the idea of individualism, that I must serve myself so that I can feel better about myself, so that I feel that I'm getting what I want. And this is kind of the concept of do as thou wilt. The famous author was Aleister Crowley. So you're going into like Satanism and things like that, but that's the essence, right? But the Quran contradicts that as well, where it says, وَنَهَى النَّفْسُ عَنِ الْهَوَى, and he who denied his nafs from pursuing its desire. That is not what's promoted today. It says, follow your desire, be happy, make sure that you are happy, do whatever it is to make you happy at the expense of everybody else, at the expense of, for example, cutting off relationships. When Islam says you must make sure that you hold on to your family, you make sure that you maintain that relationship, and that's one of the sources of rizq, by the way, and that's a separate conversation. But these things that hold families together to form a protection against the evils in the world that are out there today, that are orchestrated and managed, that are completely designed by the devil himself. And we know of the grandest of conspiracies, this is the devil at the top. And this isn't somebody telling you. This is in the Quran, in many places, but specifically you can look at Surah Al-A'raf, right, where there's a whole conversation that has taken place between Allah and the shaitan, where he's saying, bow down to Adam alayhi salam, and he refuses. And so he says, get out of here. He says, give me some time till the day of judgment. I'm going to do everything in my power. بِعِزَّتِكَ لَأَغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. I will do everything in my power, by your might, O Allah. He's taken an oath in front of Allah to do everything in his power to make sure that he deviates mankind to the furthest way possible to remove the honor and dignity that Allah has given both man and woman. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. SubhanAllah. That idea is not what we see today. We see something completely opposite, but guys under the idea of we're giving you liberty, we're giving you freedom, we're giving you honor. No, you're not. You are degrading. You are making a society that is so far away from the truth that they've lost their purpose, that they have no idea what they're doing. And so they're just walking around haphazardly, and a confused society is a controlled society. And so you come from these different aspects and you have a multi-prone attack. And this is the thing, you got a spiritual attack, an emotional attack, a physical attack. In every form you constantly have an attack, again, because of the grand conspiracy. The shaitan doesn't sleep, he doesn't take a day off. He's got his armies of al-ins wa jinn, of jinn kind and mankind, there to try to do whatever they can to manipulate the reality from in front of you, so that you forget the path of Allah. Because if you forget that, you forget your purpose. And if you have no purpose, then you are controlled. And what are you controlled by? The dunya. And so you have these different movements that come out that are not part of Islam, that are not originated by Islam, that have not been given to you by the Creator, the one who is the most just. Al-Adil. Subhanallah. You have a Creator who does not oppress anybody, a believer or a disbeliever. He does not oppress anybody. And he has given you a set of instructions and guidelines on how to lead your life. Why? So that you can become the most optimal version of yourself. to serve yourself, to serve your master, to serve society, to serve your family.
Thank you, brother Khaled. I'm sure you can. I think you can stop. I think you can talk for the next 40 minutes without stopping.
My
It's quite
apologies.
impressive. You're holding your breath rate is really good, almost as good as singers and rappers, mashallah. Not the singers and rappers, but
I hear you.
it's a talent in itself. I think with regards to the family structure, one of the consequences of modern day relationships and families are the increase of divorces,
Sure.
the decrease of fertility rates, and I think the West in particular are grappling with low fertility rates. I think Office of National Statistics 2022 said that at current it's declining, it's ever so declining. I think at current it's at 1.5. Now that's a wider picture, and that entails or comprises Muslims and non-Muslims alike.
Sure.
Muslims in this country are an ethnic minority. I think alhamdulillah our fertility rates are not as comparable as those of other ethnicities or cultures within the country.
Sure.
But one thing that has affected us, and this goes, it's undeniable. This is something that's affected us because we are both the mother and the father, the husband and the wife are working. That has changed the dynamic and the communication and the conversations that are being had at home, albeit with kids or without kids.
Sure.
Can I ask you about this lulled into this false sense of empowerment? Empowerment to the woman because she works. I'm all for rights and I'm all for justice. But they're lulled into this false sense of empowerment. And I think there is a direct correlation, if I'm not being bold enough to say, direct correlation between this false sense of empowerment and divorce rates. Now, I'm not taking the limelight away from men, because I think men have been emasculated because of it.
Right.
So what's your take on that?
That because of this false sense of empowerment to women, that there's an increase in divorces?
There's an increase in divorces because of that, but because of this empowerment that they believe that they have, men have been emasculated because of it. I'm speaking generally. You have your exceptional men and exceptional women.
Sure, this is because, I mean, many reasons, obviously, there's always many reasons to these things, and it's never a simple answer, but the reality is if you don't understand your role in your gender, then your role in a relationship with your spouse, then you might go into competition, and this is what you see.
Essentially, yeah, competition, right. You've summarized it.
So you have, for example, the woman who's trying to say that I want to compete in a man's world so that I can be the same or better, right? What are you competing for? Exactly. What are you trying to compete for? Now, this doesn't mean that you don't let a woman get, achieve an education or achieve a position or open up a business or do whatever. None of that. Islam does not contradict any of that. On the contrary, we have Khadija radiallahu anha, for example. Very intelligent, smart, good businesswoman. There's many other examples. That's just one of the most famous ones, of course. But that does not mean that you are not allowed to pursue that kind of path. However, understand that you have certain roles, and these roles weren't decided for you by some guy or some government or some man-made system. These were decided for you by your creator, for both the man and the woman. And you'll find in the Quran, there's a difference between being a male and being a man. There's a dhakar and then there's a rajal. And you will find wherever the word a rajal is usually mentioned, you will find that there is a sense of responsibility that's followed. الرجال قوامون على النساء. They are constantly maintaining, constantly taking care of and providing. You have to sit there and make sure that everything is right for them because this is your obligation, for example, right? But now when you get these movements coming out, that's saying, let's empower women. Why did you think that you were in a position of weakness in the first place when Allah has honored you by saying that you are a wife, that the best of you are the best of you to your families, to your wives, that you raise the next generation, that paradise lies under the feet of the mothers? When did you feel the sense of, I don't have this empowerment? When did that happen? Maybe you've been around some people who've misunderstood the deen, for example, or don't actually implement anything of the deen. But the deen in and of itself is not unjust. How can it be when it came from the most just? And so either your understanding is incorrect, or you choose to misunderstand deliberately in pursuit of your desires. And that's something that, may Allah guide us all to the straight path, subhanAllah. But an increase in divorce rates would happen if you have that misunderstanding, and that's by default. But then again, that's one of the deliberate attacks that's done by this matrix system thing, because they want to have divorcees in society. They want to have single parent households out there to make it more of a struggle. By the way, if you have that, now we go back, who's going to take care of the children? And so now you can get them at a very young age, where you can teach them whatever you want, whatever version of reality. Let's separate church from state. Let's not teach about religion. That's kind of outdated. Maybe your parents weren't. I don't know. But for right now, let's focus on X, Y, and Z. Now, X, Y, and Z, that's a lot to talk about in terms of what are they actually teaching in terms of curriculums, the styles, the methodologies, the schooling systems, etc. And that's a very long topic. But nevertheless, you have given your child, your most prized, for lack of a better word, possession, actually blessing from Allah, to a society that you find evil. that is corrupt, that is immoral, that is degenerate in that sense, that is not following teachings of Islam, and you've taken your child and given it to that society and said, here you go, society, give them back to me when you're ready. Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? Why?
And a lot of people are.
Why would you do that? Why? Because you are pursuing what? Rizq that was written for you 50,000 years before creation? Your rizq was written down to the T, what you would get and what you wouldn't get 50,000 years before creation, and you're out in pursuit of that perhaps you would break down your own morals and disregard your own religion and guidelines?
I'll give you the most common answer out there that both man and women put.
Sure.
And I'm not criticizing them. I'm neither judging them. But there are consequences to every action. And the most common answer is the father obviously invariably works full time, but the mother, she has a career that she wants to pursue. She gets bored at home taking care of kids. She maybe works part-time or maybe works 40 hours, 37 hours. She maybe works 36 hours a week. She has her own life. She has her own life. It's too much to take care of kids.
You're focusing on individualism here again.
But that's the answer they're given, aren't they?
Sure, you can get that answer. You're bored of your own life. That doesn't justify that you can break away from the roles that you were given to you by your creator. Just because I'm bored of it, understand the hierarchy of the relationship that we have. Master, servant. I don't get to question. I was told, Sami'na wa ata'na, I hear and I obey. What are my roles? What are my duties? As a man, this is what's given to me by God. Okay, I fulfill as best I can. And if I fall short, may Allah forgive us. Same thing for the woman. But then when you say I'm bored of what? I'm bored of fulfilling the purpose that Allah has decreed for me, that gives me honor and dignity.
Another one, we can't afford, and we're going to come into the financial structures, but we can't afford on one income. So the wife, not through the fault of her own, she has to work because it's expensive.
And this happens.
So what happens then? Because ultimately the solution or the outcome is the same. The children are given to nurseries, private nurseries, and paid to be indoctrinated.
And this is a sad reality that we do exist, we do live in today. And that is a sad reality. And now you can say which came first, the chicken or the egg. What came first? Was it the increase in cost of living or the increase in workforce that's available, because now we've brought women into the workforce, so now we have more people to produce, and so therefore there's higher consumerism and more people to buy, and so now things go up. Because now there's two incomes coming into the household. A supplier, a producer would think, well, they have more money, more disposable income, let's just shoot up the prices. And so now the prices start going up, and then they start making you stay in that trap. Because you were there in the beginning, husband and wife both went to work, prices went up, now you can't get out.
Keyword trap.
It is a trap. And that's a trap of consumerism and materialism. Again, one of the tricks of the Dajaal, but in that sense, it is a materialistic trap where you try to go, when you get into it, it's difficult to get out. And there are families, unfortunately, living in that reality, where if the woman were to quit her job, to try to focus on her deen, to try to focus on her family, to try to focus on the obligations that she is meant to as a Muslim, for example, then how would they hold the house together? Now, there's a few elements there to touch on. First is tawakkul. First is to understand that Allah is a Razzaq. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't tie your camel. You just say, all right, God's going to provide, I'm just going to quit my job. No, you take a rational decision to try to understand a way out. But you have to understand that Allah will provide a way out. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. And whoever has fear and piety, and that's a rough translation of Allah, Allah will grant for them a way out. This is in the Quran, the book that we have no doubt in that every single word and every single verse is the absolute truth because it has come from the Creator. So why then would you be afraid if you know that Allah is on your side because you are trying to fulfill a purpose to please Him? That's what you're doing.
Thank you very much. We are very short on time.
I know.
Quick key statement. So I'm going to give you, I want to know what the consequences, very high level, holistic perspective, bird's eye view, the consequences of divorce in society, the consequences of both parents working in society, and lastly, the consequence of having single parent households. What are the consequences to our society because of these tangible statistics now?
So divorces in single parent households aren't necessarily always, they're not something bad. I mean, we have divorce that's allowed in Islam. Right? In times of necessity, then you are allowed to use that card.
Absolutely.
But there are certain conditions that need to be met before you can kind of engage. And ideally, it's best to stay away from it unless there is an absolute necessity. But rather, don't use it as a get out of jail free card. But if you absolutely need to.
We haven't got that. We obviously anecdotes are anecdotes, but I can't wholeheartedly say that people are using the get out of jail free card. But
when things get difficult, people try to find a way out, right? Which is why perhaps most people don't want to get into a marriage. If I can have a free relationship outside of a marriage where I don't have to go to court and sign any papers and then I don't have any obligations or rights towards you, it's easier for everybody, isn't it? So you'll find people in 10-year relationships that are not married and they have children. It's like, why? Well, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? So when you go into this idea of the dating mentality, what are you really saying? You're saying that I'm with you for now, but if I find the next better model that comes out, I'd rather trade you in for the next, subhanAllah. And that, you're telling me that's honorable, that's liberating, that's freedom? That's, subhanAllah, I don't know what else it's, Where's your logic in that? So when you're talking about divorce, it's not a bad, it's like, oh, divorce. No, divorce is not a iba. It's not a, what's the word? It's not a difficulty on society. But if divorces do increase, you have to understand what is the root cause behind that increase. And you always find this, right? And I've said this before. And a few
Can I make an assertion that the Matrix wants us to divorce, and the system wants us to have single parent households, and the Matrix wants us to have disconnected, disjointed families? Because that would be his ultimate agenda in order to have a disjointed society.
100%.
Which is contravening or contradictory to a Muslim society.
100%. Why? Again, because that family is creating a veil of protection. After Allah, Wallahu al-Hafiz, Allah protects, right? But you also have to tie your camel and then have tawakkul. So you do whatever what you find necessary under Islamic guidance. And so your family is that veil of protection against the world today. So you don't have to go out and force your children, force your spouse to go out into that society and be indoctrinated by whatever they're trying to teach and preach under the guise that this is something good. And this is where the Matrix comes in. It says, okay, you don't want to go out? You guys have enough money, for example, that both parents don't need to go out and work? Fine. Let's give you a TV. And now let's bring our stuff to you. We'll bring it to you in the comfort of your own home. You can sit home, put on a nice show, and just watch whatever it is. And subliminally, you're starting to be subjected to these ideologies that are out there. And then you wake up one day and you find your child's asking all these kinds of weird questions. Or saying that, for example, they like X, Y, and Z. And this is not Islamic. This is not what you raised them upon. And then you think, why? Why? Why do you think that happened? Where was the guidance they needed when they needed it? Now, huda Allah. Guidance comes from Allah, but you also have a duty and a responsibility, especially if you've been blessed with children, to adhere to that.
I have to stop you there and move on to the next topic, because we can talk about this for 4 hours.
Sure.
I probably will, when you're free, have you on for a part 2.
Inshallah.
Thank you very much. I understand you're a very busy man. Now, the next topic is, what do you want to do? We can go in order. Financial structures or sexualization of society? Which one would you like to go for first?
It's like a Pepsi or a Coke, man. Which one do you want?
Pepsi or Coke?
We can talk about financial structures. What do you
Okay,
got?
financial structures. The first thing that comes to everyone's mind, particularly in the West and in the UK, is interest and riba.
Right.
And there's this notion that, and I'm guilty of this as well. We want to buy one house,
Yeah.
and we sort of go fatwa shopping, if that's the term.
That is.
We can only buy one house. Obviously, it's a need for me to live in. Renting, the justification we give ourselves, if I were to summarize it, is renting is very expensive. It makes financial sense,
Correct.
equity sense,
Of course it does.
to buy a house and live in it.
Right.
So let's talk about that financial model and our mindset.
If the haram wasn't attractive, why would you go to it? It has to be attractive. It's got to make sense to you, perhaps. It's either got to attract you emotionally or logically. This is one of those logical ones with a bit of emotion. What is the emotional side? Let's talk about that first before we go into the finances and trying to understand whether or not it's better to rent or to buy. There's a lot of logical, very clear answers. Obviously, you could say, well, it makes sense. Even if the rent and the mortgage were the same, at least you're buying out equity here. And over 30 years, then inshallah, you'll have your own home that you could say that it's yours and you can pass on to your children. That's all the logical side that we can get to in a minute, inshallah. But the emotional side is interesting, because what are they really selling to you when they're trying to sell you a house? Because this is the idea of marketing, right? You're tapping into some of the deepest desires that we have. And if you look at, for example, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all have this need for shelter, right? And so we have this innate need to want to find children. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you tap into that, what are you actually selling me here when you're trying to provide this shelter for me to meet my need? You're selling me a sense of security, right? Because if I'm renting, I'm at the mercy of my landlord or landlady. Any second now they could kick me out. Any second now I got to move, whatever the case is. And my kids are already settled. I got school down the road. I've got the bus lane. I've figured that whole thing out. I've got a nice parking. I know what I'm talking about. I know where I am. I know my neighbors. I want to be here, for example. And so they sell you this false sense of security. The reason it's false is because it's not entirely as stable as you may think, for example. What, just because if you fall short of your mortgage payments, what happens? They say it's all right?
No, it's not.
Okay. Now they may be a little more lenient, maybe in certain cases in certain countries with their with you, for example, or with a person who's taken a mortgage, as opposed to a tenant and a landlord relationship. That is true to some extent in certain situations, but generally, don't pay your bill and see what happens. And you saw that in 2008 crisis in the states across the world, and it had everywhere, because people couldn't pay their bill because they were giving out mortgages left and right to anybody who wanted. And you have a name, you have a driver's license, just take a mortgage, and they were giving it out to you. Why? And you have to understand the magnitude of how the mountain of riba works. Now, aside from understanding, and I'll touch on that as well, riba, very simple. Allah wages a war against those who engage in riba. It's quite simple. There's a war. You want to sit and justify it. And some people will say, for example, if I use a credit card and it might go into riba. Let's say that if you didn't pay your credit card bill, it wasn't going to accumulate interest, but you had to take a drink of alcohol. Would you say, okay, you would rush to make sure that you pay that bill before the interest, accumulated, for example. But with interest, we just take it light. And getting interest or dealing with interest is far worse than drinking alcohol, in terms of the punishment that's been mentioned in the Quran. This one you have Allah and His angels waging a war against you. But anyways, that's kind of a sidetrack there. They are selling you on an idea that you have this permanent abode. And Allah has taught us that this dunya is nothing but a temporary stop along the way. There is nothing here that is permanent. And He's highlighted that multiple times. And you'll even find that in Surah Al-Kahf, for example, again, the chapter that we're meant to read every Friday as a means to protect us. You will find that Allah references this dunya as something that is temporary. And so when they come and sell to us these mortgages that are haram based, and you have people who do go and do these fatwa shoppings, and it's like when you're doing a fatwa shopping, what are you actually looking for? Are you looking for the truth, or are you looking for subjective truth? So you have people who do go on this process that you called fatwa shopping, and essentially what is it you're looking for? Are you looking for the truth, the objective truth, or subjective truth? Subjective truth, then you got bigger problems, you got bigger fish to fry, because you're not actually in pursuit of truth. You're looking for somebody to tell you it's okay to do the haram. It's okay for you to do X, Y, and Z when you know that clearly it goes against Islamic teachings. So that boils down to your own individual, and there are people of knowledge, scholars and sheikhs who have said that it's allowed, and they have their own justification as to doing so. And it's not my position or my place to kind of go against them. To each their own.
I want to focus it more, narrow it down to if one was to, because of these ideas and notions and desires they have, or this false sense of security that they may have. Obviously, you've outlined the Islamic principles and the outright abomination associated to purchasing a house. Albeit, let's put that to the side now. Someone has a house. Right. One of the common themes that I've asked people that have bought a house is this: yes, I've got a house now, and I've got a 25-year mortgage.
Right. Who owns the house?
Who owns the house?
You come in with like 5 or 10% down payment, and you say, well, I own the house. No, you don't. Yeah. You may own a couple of walls and a door, perhaps a window, if you're really lucky. Depends on the value of the house. Yeah. But the reality is the bank actually owns it. Don't pay the bill, and we'll see who owns it. You don't own it. Again, that false sense of security that I own a house. No, you don't. You do not own the house. Sure, you're buying out your equity, and you're getting there eventually over time if you continue paying your bill. But until that time, you do not own the house.
Okay, so logically, more often than not, especially in London and the southeast, right, paying a mortgage is far, far cheaper than renting, along with all the other perks that it has. Sure. The problem that I find, and this is the trap, and comes back to what the system is advocating, is one has a house and they've justified it because, let's go by the notion that, it's better for them to buy a house than to rent that one house, and they went fatwa shopping, or they've got some sheikh telling them or endorsing their purchase. What they soon find to be happening is in 2 or 3 years' time, with greed and desire, and they're chasing the everlasting.
They want a bigger house.
They want a bigger house, but they don't want to sell this house. What they want to do is rent this house because it would be foolish to sell equity, particularly in the West, because land is wealth. So they remortgage this house, and then they'll go on to buy another house with less equity in both of them, massive interest rate mortgages on both of them, and they'll be on the second property, the first property that they lived in, it would be on an interest-only payment.
A balloon payment.
So an interest-only payment until the term is finished. So that reduces the payments on the existing house that you're living in when you go and live in the other house. So you're making a profit from it. So we've got Muslims profiting from riba now. Whereas initially they went in just to
paying riba, and now they're receiving
riba. Profiting riba now,
All I see is more shackles. I mean, tell me otherwise. You just went from one bank to saying, even the same bank, you had one chain around you, and now you've taken two. And now you're saying that I'm subject to whatever you guys say, essentially. You've got to pay them. Now, to pay them, you got to stay in the workforce. To stay in the workforce, you got to make sure that you do whatever it is necessary to keep your job going, if you're in employment, for example. Which means sometimes you may have to break the rules of your religion. If they say to do something that perhaps goes against your Islamic guidance, I mean, you've already broken certain teachings when you've taken out a mortgage, interest-based mortgage. Allahu Alam, may Allah grant us all forgiveness.
Amen.
But now, if you're in an employment, well, there's no way out, because what happens if you lose your job? So now you're struck with fear, and through that fear you have control.
Another thing I wanted to ask, that's a very important point. So someone that has a mortgage may do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do in an employment, but this makes business sense. It makes business sense.
Even if it makes business sense, if it's haram, why are you
Yeah, it's
engaging
haram.
in it?
So
Why are you engaging
there's
in
a lot of people that do fall into this trap where instead of investing in a business that is very, very high risk
Sure.
with no return, if not, you might lose all your savings,
Right.
to investing 50 to £100,000 in bricks and mortar, buying another house,
Sure.
profiteering from interest as well as paying interest.
Right.
But you, particularly in the Western system,
Okay.
you can't lose on property unless there is a crash.
Okay.
The equity of your house goes up.
Sure.
It's almost like guaranteed income every month.
Cool.
Yep. So in this system where it perpetuates or it advocates
Okay.
for us to immerse ourselves into riba.
I'm sure there's better businesses out there than just buying a mortgage and trying to take advantage of the riba delta. There's better businesses out there that are fully haram, right? Whatever, selling alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, something that's fully haram, you make a lot more money in a lot quicker, shorter time.
Yeah.
You know, if you wanted to talk about just trying to make money and disregarding any sort of moral teaching that comes from Islam, then there's better things out there.
This is another thing, if I may, and sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
Morality here. So if you and I were from Islamic backgrounds and cultures, if you were to sell drugs or even sell alcohol or even consume alcohol, your culture, your community will look at you in disdain.
Sure.
If you were to buy a property or you had 5 properties to your name, you're a landlord, your family and your community will open up wide arms. If you weren't getting salam, you get a salam. If you weren't getting smiled, you get
Correct.
smiled upon.
Because
if you
now
weren't
you're seen as somebody who's successful.
successful. So there we have it. This is the system. So not only does this sort of crime or haram is celebrated within our communities,
Sure.
it makes financial sense, it makes business sense, it elevates you up the hierarchical structure because you're a businessman now and you're wealthy. This is a bulletproof investment.
It is.
And
It is.
particularly in the Muslim demographics in this community or in the UK, our financial literacy is very low. So when we don't ordinarily go and invest in stocks and shares, we don't. But when we do invest, we invest in bricks and mortar.
Right.
And bricks and mortar invariably or inimitably comes with interest. So I want you to give your perspective from the matrix system.
In terms of the idea of success related to how you
So
have
we're
these
destroying
possessions.
ourselves in order for success, but this is what I'm trying to say is this is very carefully coordinated and recalibrated by the system itself
Of
to
course
keep
it
us
is.
in this trap.
But this again ties back into the materialism. I mean, look, with just one point in terms of the house and that whole idea of riba, you're saying that it makes financial sense. Sure, you could argue, and there's certain arguments you can make on both sides. But sure, if you want to make sense that this is a financial decision that is good for me and my family, sure. But if its underlying theme is haram, then what are you trying to do? Because this is the idea that we don't understand with rizq. When I say that, it's not me. When the Prophet Muhammad said that your rizq was ordained for you 50,000 years before creation, then your rizq is coming to you whether you like it or not. So now if you engage in haram to try to generate some money, you are going to get that money anyway, but you chose to take it the haram way. It's not that you outsmarted the system. It's not that you beat the system. And this is what the Matrix teaches you, that unless you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to be broke. In the shaitan ya'iduhum al-fuqr. Shaitan promises them poverty. This is coming from the shaitan. This is what he teaches. Poverty, to be afraid, to try to collect whatever money you can in whatever means necessary to do so because it's a matter of survival now, right? If I want to have a family, if I want to be respected in society, I need to show them this ties into the success, the falsified idea of success. The one that we have today, which is revolved around materialism. So you'll find people, well, what does he have? Does he have a car? Does he have a house? How big is the house? What kind of car does he have? What business does he run? What's his turnover annually, for example? And if I have those numbers and I have that data, then I can say this person is really actually a good guy or successful or he's worth my time. But that's not looked at in the light of Islam. That's not the case. Now, sure, these things, that doesn't mean go live in a cave and don't own anything. Not at all. Try your best to, وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبُكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا. This is in the Quran, and do not forget your share of the dunya. We have work to do here. We are meant to pursue, we are meant to take advantage and try and do whatever we can to become better people to help ourselves and our societies. This is by default, that's there. But you don't do it at the expense of forgetting your purpose. This is where the problem is. And so that incorrect idea of what success is, which is what's kind of circulating in the world today, is what car does he drive and how big is his house and what postcode is he on, etc. That idea, where did that come from? Because nobody looks at a candidate and says, for example, a candidate for marriage, if you want to talk about, since we were talking about marriage earlier, and says, well, does he know the Quran? You know, has he understood the Quran? Does he know any hadith? What's his Islamic background? It's like, oh, he's Muslim. That's okay. Just khalas, he's got the name because he meets the criteria that you got to marry a Muslim. He's Muslim. Fine. Now, how much money he's got in his account? You know, and it's like, أَلَيْسَ الرَّازِقُ هُوَ الْهَادِي? Is not the one who provided the money the same one who gives the guidance? Why did you choose, for example, you had two candidates, right? One who's very wealthy, but is not on the deen, but one who's very deenish, who understands the deen and understands the responsibility that he has as a man, for example, but is not doing too well financially. Most people, sadly, and I hope to God that I'm wrong on this, perhaps I'm being pessimistic, but most people would choose the one who is better off financially. Why? Because they can see a sense of security. When
Almost
that sense
always.
of security is falsified, because maybe he has that $10 million today and it goes away tomorrow. Is that not possible? Did we not see that in the second fitna in Surah Al-Kahf, with the story of the guy who had the 2 gardens and he had everything and he thought to himself, I've got this agricultural
He
business.
committed shirk, didn't he?
Of course.
Yeah.
He did. And he said, there is no day of judgment. That's not happening. And if there was, on the off chance that there's a God, and this actually perishes at some point, then Allah will give me something better than this. Why? Because He's given me all this good stuff in this world, so therefore clearly He loves me and likes me, which is why He's given me all these provisions. So when I go back to Him on the day of judgment, if that exists, He's going to give me something far better. That idea is also here, by the way. We have it in the Muslim world, sadly. It's infiltrated from the West, that if you did want to believe in God, etc., if you really had to go down that route, if you are blessed with X, Y, and Z, then God likes you. But if you're not, then perhaps God's angry with you. When did that come in to play? That idea of materialism being tied with God's favor. How did that come in? I mean, last I checked, Muhammad ﷺ, when he died, from what I recall, I think he had 7 dinars to his name or 7 dirhams to his name. He wasn't doing too well off, was he?
Just equivalent to 7 dirhams to...
No.
There isn't
so
equivalent,
I don't know, maybe £700, 7,000 pounds, something small for a man who's in his 60s, who's lived his whole life, who was married to a wealthy woman, who was a trader, who did businesses, etc. That's what he had left.
And the ruler as well.
And the ruler, exactly.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that materialism isn't tied to success, but you have this incorrect idea of what success is, that we force it into materialism. And if that's the case, for you to be successful in the eyes of society, you must have that materialistic hunger, and that keeps you back into the trap. So you got to go get a job so that you can go get a mortgage, so you can show people, look how big that house is. Or you can get a credit card. And you've heard the famous, I think it's a quote or a saying, it says, you buy things you don't need to impress people you don't care about, for example. So you're stretching beyond the limit. Why? Just so people can say, look at his watch, look at his shoes, look at that car he's got. Didn't Qarun do something similar? The story of Musa alayhi salam, he was of Bani Israel, he was walking around, he was flexing, he was showing off. And when they said, La tafrah, inna Allahu la yuhibbul farihin, do not be happy. And the translation of happy here isn't don't be happy. It means do not boast in an arrogant way. Allah is the one who gave you. And his response was, قَدْ أُوتِيتُهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ مِّنْ عِنْدِي. I did all this. This is from my hard work. I worked hard. I put in days and nights. I did blood, sweat, and tears. I built this empire out of scratch. This is mine. I will take pride in it. But that pride now is arrogance. SubhanAllah. And then what happened to Qarun at the end? And when everyone was walking around and they drove past his house and they saw how he was living at large, Ya layta lana mithla ma utiya Qarun. Everybody said, I wish we had what he had. Look how he's living. Look at that. But then when Allah opened up the earth and it swallowed him, everyone's like, oh, you know what? Thank God I wasn't him. Thank God I wasn't him.
If I can add to your beautiful explanation, what's common that I've found in this day and age, and we're all guilty of it, may Allah protect us, is that 1 out of 10 of us will attempt the same business, or Allah's given us risk.
Sure.
And one out of 10, perhaps 1 out of 100 of us, 1 out of 100, they're given that wealth and they become successful.
Right.
And they adopt the same Qarun methodology. And they start giving lectures, and they're on YouTube, and they're saying you have to do this and you have to do that. You have to work 18 hours a day.
Sure.
And what they don't see is that risk was written for you. There's someone else out there that put in more work than you did. They're smarter than you. They're more able than you, but Allah chose you and favored you with that risk.
Correct.
So that's another form of arrogance that we all have in us, where we think we've done very successfully or well in some sort of project. Let's use business. And then we have the nerve or the audacity to come out and start lecturing people and having workshops. Oh, if you do this and if you do that, you'll be successful like me. I'm not going to do the injustice of asking you to go into the sexualization of society and pornography. I'm going to ask you in front of camera, and I'm sure the audience will definitely have appetite. Another day, perhaps in the coming months or weeks, whenever you're free, I think we'll shoot part 2. It's incumbent upon us for us to have you back for a part 2. I'm not going to ask you about that. I'm just going to stick to this topic. We haven't got enough time. If I can draw back to your beautiful explanations about riba and consumerism and credit.
Right.
So if I were to summarize that, the society that we live in, it actually lives on credit and consumerism. And it preys almost like a vulture that we live off that. their credit system.
It's all a fake system. It's not real.
Yeah.
None of it
Talk
is
to me
real.
about that.
It's all an entire scam. I mean, you can go into the conspiracies of it, but the reality is it is an entire scam. The whole idea that the money that we have today in circulation is actually built upon something, it's not. It's built upon nothing. And you say, well, no, it's built by the government's backing. What government backing? When they're just printing it out of thin air. For example, when you look in COVID in the States, how many $1 billion did they print in one single year out of thin air? And then they say, well, you know, it doesn't, we just printed it. Fine. Okay, you printed it, but who's paying the cost of it? Nobody. Actually, that's not true. Because when you print money, you're putting more into circulation. What happens to the cost of goods? They go up because now what do you have? You have this inflation that kicks off in the market. Who's paying the bill now? The average citizen who did not necessarily vote in your democratic system to have this money printed to do whatever you want with, for example. And you see that with some wars today, right? Without going into too much detail, you will see certain money being printed by certain governments around the world to promote or push or do whatever they want with that money, when I thought you lived in a democracy, but you don't get to choose, for example. And I won't touch on that one. This is a larger topic and it would require a lot more time. But coming back to the origins of the money, the idea of it, essentially, the way it is today, is not real. It's fabricated. It's a falsified sense of security that is not really there. They have people chasing nothing at the end of the day. And Islam again highlights this multiple times everywhere. Nothing in this dunya is permanent. Nothing. Right? That doesn't mean you give up. There's a difference. As Muslims, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا, we have made you the people of nation of balance. We have, وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا, do not forget your share of the dunya. We have to pursue, we have to try. Live in this dunya as if you will live forever. But at the same time, live in this dunya and prepare for your akhirah as if you will die tomorrow. Find the balance between the two. And that's what you're meant to do. The reality is, but we don't get that. We just get hustle, move. And if you're not hustling, what's wrong with you, man? Come on, you got to get out there. You got to pursue. Pursue what exactly? The money. What kind of money are we talking about here? This thing that they print out of thin air, that they fluctuate, they control, they manipulate, and they adjust however they see fit to make sure that their agendas are working around the world so they can push whatever they want. And they have people chasing a dollar. I mean, subhanAllah, I mean, if you want to, I mean, there's economists out there who are way better educated in this than I am, but if you look at, for example, what a dollar or a pound would buy 5-10 years ago, everybody knows this, right? In comparison to where we are today. So if you had $10,000 in the bank 10 years ago, and you didn't touch it, and you left it in the account today, and you didn't collect this interest, right, this whole scam that's going on, and you just left it there today, well, your value would actually be maybe around $7,000 or $8,000 today. You didn't spend it, you didn't do anything with it, so why did you just get oppressed? I did the hard work. I played by the game of the matrix. I followed it. I followed the rules. I did yes sir, no sir. I did my job. I took my savings. I lived less than my means. I did the whole thing. And I tried and I saved my money and I put it in a bank account. 10 years later, I wanted to use it. Well, it can only buy $7,000 worth of goods as opposed to 10,000. Why? Why did I get the short end of that stick? There's a problem there. The idea, the entirety of that system is built upon taking advantage of the people to make them poorer and threaten them with poverty unless they play ball and stay in that little idea of constantly going onto a hamster wheel. Keep working, keep chasing. Otherwise, if you fall off that wheel, you go into the poverty pile, and you don't want to be there, right? It's awful out there, etc., etc. But if you really try and you really work hard, then eventually you'll make it all the way up to the top. But the reality is, the more hours you put into this job, for example, and I'm not against a job. On the contrary, any work is honorable provided it's halal. This is not against employment. It's against the idea that they use employment to enslave people, to keep them in that cycle where they don't necessarily learn any skills that can help them better themselves, so that they can go out and do their own thing, so they don't have to be dependent on somebody or a system. This is the reality. And you'll find a lot of people today, well, I just do this job. What else can you do? Nothing. And so if this job were to get rid of you because perhaps you are exchangeable, or we can just bring somebody else tomorrow, then what value are you really bringing to the table? Because the market doesn't give you what you want. It will give you what you deserve. And that's, loosely thrown out there.
Thank you, Brother Khaled Shaheen. I will end on there. Thank you very much. It's been very beneficial.
Thank you.
Very engaging, very intellectual. But I'm just telling you in front of my audience, who are Muslim and non-Muslim alike, we definitely want you for a part 2, and we're probably going to cover the sexualization of society, the proliferation of pornography, amongst other stuff. But you let me know when you're free, inshallah. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've benefited. We've only just touched on the crumbs of the matrix system that everyone else is talking about. But I hope that Silent Majority, alongside collaborating with Brother Khaled Shaheen, has given you an insight into how the system that controls you and I, and the system that we are in the playground of, and we have to play, whether we like it or not. Hopefully we've given you an insight and glimpse into that. Thank you very much for watching, and we shall see you in the next episode. Thank you. Bye-bye.